The kettle was already screaming when I heard it. Not the kettle, the television. My aunt turned up the volume before I could even ask what was happening, and the two of us stood there in her kitchen in Lagos, her with a dish towel thrown over her shoulder, me with a half-eaten chin-chin in my hand, watching a BBC correspondent standing outside Buckingham Palace in what looked like miserable London drizzle, saying words that didn't quite land the first time. The palace has confirmed this morning that the Prince and Princess of Wales will lead a landmark engagement to Nigeria later this year, marking one of the most significant royal visits to the African continent in over 2 decades. My aunt set down her spatula. That is the detail I remember most. Not the words, not the banner scrolling across the bottom of the screen. I mean, the spatula. She just placed it on the counter very gently, like she was afraid of making noise. We looked at each other. Then she said in Yoruba, something that roughly translates to, "They are coming here." Fun fact, let me tell you something about growing up in Lagos and being told every so often that something big is coming. A president's visit. A stadium sort of concert, which a trade summit. You learn to be cautious with excitement. You learn that big things are announced in January and arrive, if they arrive, sometime around the following October, stripped of half their promise. So that morning, I didn't let myself feel too much. I finished the chin-chin, which I watched the correspondent explain the background, the Commonwealth ties, the decades of diplomatic warmth, and the fact that this would be William and Catherine's first major solo bilateral visit to a sub-Saharan nation as the Prince and Princess of Wales. I listened to an analyst in a studio somewhere talk about the soft power implications, the symbolism, the timing. Then I went to work. But look, the city already knew. By the time I got onto the bus, 3 people around me were on their phones, not scrolling, talking, loudly, which one man near the back was on a call saying, No, brother, it's confirmed. Palace confirmed. I just saw." A woman in a yellow head wrap was leaning toward her seatmate, voice low, but animated, the way people speak when something lands between ordinary news and personal feeling. The bus driver had a radio on. It was already the lead story. I need to explain something about what William and Catherine mean, not as institutions, not as headlines, but as images, to people who grew up watching their story from this side of the world. I actually was 12 years old when Catherine walked out of Westminster Abbey on that April morning in 2011. My mother had stayed up to watch it live, which was unusual for her. Honestly, she isn't a sentimental woman. She does not lose sleep over ceremonies, but she was sitting on the edge of the sofa at 4 in the morning in a house that smelled like the onions she'd been chopping for the next day's stew, watching a woman in a white dress walk toward a man who looked like he was trying very hard not to cry. I sat beside her without being asked. We didn't talk much during it. We didn't need to. It was, in my opinion, one of those moments that moves through screens and time zones and cultural distances and lands somewhere in your chest anyway. Not because it belongs to you, but because human things sometimes just do that. Belong, actually, to everyone a little. And then the years passed, and the children came, and the photographs came, and the grief came. God, the grief. Her mother-in-law's death rippling outward like a stone dropped into water, touching people who had never set foot in England and never would, and somewhere in all of it, Catherine became something more specific than a princess. She became familiar, not in the way that erases her from who she actually is, but familiar in the way that certain public figures become, woven into the rhythm of your years without you choosing it, present at the edges of ordinary life. So when the palace said they were coming here, actually coming, which it wasn't just news. My colleague Funmi found me at my desk at 9:30, phone first, the way she always brings information. "You saw?" she said. I saw. My mother is already talking about going to see them. Where? They haven't announced locations yet. Funmi waved her hand. Details? She said she will find out where they're going and she will be there. She sat down. She ironed a dress in 2003 when Prince Charles came and never got close enough to see him. She said she isn't making that mistake again. I laughed. Then I thought about her mother, a woman I'd met twice, small and precise, serious, well, who kept her good clothes wrapped in cloth, ironing a dress in 2003 for a prince she never actually saw, standing somewhere in a crowd, waiting. And there was something in that image that sat heavy with me in a way I couldn't immediately explain. The confirmation had come through official channels early that morning, a joint statement from Kensington Palace and the Nigerian presidency's office, measured and formal in the way these things always are, full of phrases like deepening bilateral relations and shared Commonwealth heritage and cultural and economic partnership. But between the lines of diplomatic language, if you knew how to read it, was something that felt genuinely unusual. This wasn't a stopover. This wasn't a single gala dinner and a hospital visit and back to the plane. The itinerary, still being finalized according to sources quoted across every outlet that morning, was described as multi-day and multi-city. There were actually references to youth programs, to agricultural development initiatives, to engagements that would go beyond the capital. Someone had sat down and thought carefully about this visit. That was the part that made people stop. Because there's a version of royal diplomacy that is all ceremony and no substance, a handshake photographed from 17 angles, a wreath laid at a monument, a state dinner menu announced 2 weeks later. And there's a version that means something. That comes from somewhere deliberate. The signals on this particular morning pointed toward the second version. A senior commentator on one of the satellite channels said it plainly. William has been preparing for the role of monarch for his entire adult life. This visit, the scale of it, had the intention behind it. This looks like someone stepping into that role. I wrote that line down. I don't always write lines down, but some things land and you want to keep them. By lunchtime, the restaurant around the corner from my office was noisier than usual, not because of the food, though the jollof was good that day, smokier than normal, the kind that makes you eat past the point of sense, but because every table seemed to have the same conversation happening at a different volume. An older man near the window, the kind of man who wears a suit jacket to lunch every day regardless of weather, was telling someone across from him that this was a moment for Nigeria. That the international attention this would bring, the cameras, the coverage, and the hundreds of journalists who would arrive ahead of the royals was the kind of thing you couldn't manufacture. Every major news outlet in the world will be here, he said. Every one. His companion nodded slowly, stirring his drink. The question, the companion said, is what story they'll tell. That landed in my chest, too. Because he was right. He was exactly right. The cameras would come. And cameras don't just observe, they select. They decide which street, which face, which moment. They build a version of a place and send it out into the world. That version travels further and lasts longer than anything you might want to say in correction. What story would they tell? Plus, I called TBH, my mother, that evening. She answered on. The second ring, which means she'd already been thinking about calling me. You heard, I said. Oh, since morning, she said. We were, I guess, quiet for a moment in the way families are quiet. Comfortable, familiar, no pressure to fill it. Then she said, Your grandmother would have cried. I didn't say anything. She loved the Queen, my mother said, and her voice was soft in a way it rarely gets. When she died, when the old Queen died, your grandmother sat in the parlor and she didn't eat that afternoon. I told her, Mama, you never met her. She said, TBH, does it matter? I held the phone and looked out my window at the street below, at the yellow lights beginning to come on, at the hawker pushing his cart past the gutter, at all the ordinary evening business of the city going about itself. Does it matter? No, I said. I suppose it doesn't. My mother made a small sound. Agreement, or for what it's worth. Memory, or both. And your grandmother would want to go and see them, she said. She would kind of put on her best wrapper, and she would stand wherever they told her to stand. She would wait as long as they told her to wait. Like Funmi's mother. Like every woman of that generation, my mother said. That night I found an old photograph online. Not that night's news, not the palace statement, but a photograph from 1956. The Queen, the young Queen, barely 32 years into her reign, standing in Lagos, surrounded by color and crowds and light, looking out at a city that was, in that moment, looking back at her. There's something strange and large and not entirely comfortable about that history, about what a British monarch meant on Nigerian soil in 1956, and what the presence of the British crown still means and doesn't mean and complicates today. I'm not pretending those questions aren't there. They are there, and they were in the restaurant at lunch. They were in for what it's worth. The television commentary I half-watched that evening, where two analysts politely disagreed about whether royal visits to former colonies are symbols of friendship or echoes of something that never fully resolved. They were in the text my friend Emeka sent me at 10 that night. Just a question mark and a raised eyebrow emoji, which I understood completely. Those questions are part of the story too. But so is the woman ironing her dress in 2003. So is my mother's voice going soft when she said your grandmother would have cried. Both of those things are true. They live in the same city. Us breathe the same air, sit down at the same lunch table. And any story about this visit that doesn't hold both of them at once is telling you less than the full truth. I closed my laptop at midnight. The ceiling fan turned slowly above me, doing almost nothing against the heat. Tomorrow the details would sharpen. Specific dates, specific cities, specific programs. Tomorrow the official machinery would begin in earnest. Tomorrow the television would fill up with analysts and logistics and diplomatic language. But tonight, it was still just the announcement. Still just two people in a palace and a country on the other side of the world. The quiet understanding that something was going to happen here that hadn't happened before. I thought pretty much about my grandmother, who I lost 3 years ago, who sat in her parlor and didn't eat the afternoon the old Queen died. I thought about a young woman in a white dress, walking towards someone trying not to cry. I thought about Funmi's mother and her ironed dress and the crowd she stood in and the prince she never quite saw. And I thought, as I turned off the light, as the city kept its nighttime noise outside my window, that whatever this visit would be, however it unfolded, however the cameras chose to frame it and the analysts chose to interpret it, it was already, somehow, personal. End of part 1. 3 weeks after the announcement, the road outside the National Arts Theater got repainted. Nobody said why. Nobody announced it, and workers simply arrived one Tuesday morning before the sun was properly up, orange vests, white road paint, moving in the quiet, organized way that government work moves when there's actually a deadline behind it. By, noon the curbs were bright. By evening the potholes that had been, fixtures of that road for the better part of 2 years were filled and leveled. My neighbor Chisholm, who takes a bus past that road every morning, texted me a photo. "The royals are more powerful than Lastma," she wrote, and added a crying, laughing emoji. TBH, she wasn't wrong. The full itinerary dropped on a Thursday, and the office went briefly non-functional. Not dramatically. Not like a fire alarm, and more like the particular stillness that settles over a room when everyone has independently decided that the thing they were doing before is less important than the thing on their screen right now. Someone said Abuja and Lagos, and someone else said 3 days, and a third person, Adayazi from the corner desk, who is usually the most professionally composed person in any building she enters, pushed back from her workstation and said, to no one in particular, "They're going to Makoko." That stopped everything. Makoko. Plus, the waterfront community that sits on stilts above the Lagos Lagoon. One of the most documented, photographed, and persistently misrepresented communities in West Africa. Every visiting journalist and documentary crew in the last 2 decades has pointed a camera at it, usually from a boat, usually with a narrator voice explaining poverty in a tone that manages to be both alarmed and detached. And the itinerary said William and Catherine would not be going past it. Would not be look. I'm filming it from a distance. Would be going in and meeting with community leaders, meeting with the women who run the fishing cooperatives, meeting TBH with the children who go to the floating school. There was a long pause in the office. Then our editor, a tall, thin man named Mr. Osei, who honestly has been in Nigerian journalism for 26 years and has a face that gives away nothing, looked up from his tablet and said, "Write that up, all of it, and find out who arranged it." I spent the next 2 days making calls. What I kind of found, piecemeal and across sources who mostly didn't want to be quoted, was a picture of months of quiet preparation. Not just the logistical machinery, though that existed, the security teams, and the advance parties and the protocol negotiations, but something that happened before all of that. A series of conversations with NGOs working in Lagos, with youth development organizations in Abuja, with women's, to be fair, cooperatives and agricultural reform advocates and tech incubator founders, with people for what it's worth who had spent years building things from the ground up and who were apparently asked directly, "What do you need visibility on? What story hasn't been told?" One woman I spoke to, she runs a micro-lending program for market women in Mushin, said, something that I keep returning to. "I have been to 3 summits," she told me. International ones, with the big names. And every time somebody flies in, somebody gives a speech about women's economic empowerment. Somebody takes a photograph beside one of my members who is holding a basket of tomatoes, and then they fly home. And my women, to be fair, are still where they were. She paused. "I don't know if this will be different," she said. "I have learned not to assume. But I will tell you that when the advance team came to talk to me, they didn't ask me to prepare a display. They asked me what questions I wanted answered. They asked me what I wanted them to know." She let that sit. "That isn't nothing," she said. The day Catherine's engagement details were confirmed separately, the full scope of what she basically would be doing, independent of the joint program. My inbox broke in a way it hasn't broken since the election coverage, because it was unusual, which deliberately visibly unusual. The Princess of Wales would be visiting a maternal health clinic on the outskirts of Abuja, one that operates on a combination of government funding and private donations, and manages to serve one of the most underserved catchment areas in the Federal Capital Territory. She would be meeting with nurses and midwives and the women they serve. She would be attending, separately, a roundtable on early childhood development that included Nigerian developmental psychologists, educators, and policymakers. This wasn't peripheral sort of programming. This wasn't the softer, decorative side of a state visit while the substantive work happened elsewhere. Her work was the substantive work. And I wrote a piece about it, and the headline my editor gave it was, "Catherine is not here to smile for the camera." It got shared more than anything I'd written in 8 months. My friend Tola, who is a photographer and who approaches most things with the professional skepticism of someone who has photographed too many things, that looked beautiful and meant nothing, came round to my flat on a Friday evening and sat across from me and was, for once, without a counter-argument. "I'm going," she said. "Going where?" "To cover it. I'm going to apply for press credentials." I looked at her. Tola has passed on assignments involving 3 different heads of state because she found the optics, her word, always, performative. She shot a fashion week once and left after day 2 because, she said, it was all performance and no truth. I said, "What changed?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment, turning her glass. My little cousin, she said finally. Basically, she's 9, and she came to my studio last weekend and she found a photograph I took of the princess. One of those wire images from when she visited a school in Wales or somewhere. And she stared at it for a really long time. She looked up, and then she said to me, "She looks kind." A pause. Not pretty, not fancy, kind. Tola set her glass down, which, 9 years old, and that's what she saw. And I thought, whatever I think about the symbolism, whatever I think about the politics, if that little girl can stand somewhere in this city, look at this woman in person. That means something to her that I don't have the right to take away. The city's preparation was something to witness. The Lagos prepares for things the way it does everything, loudly, chaotically, with extraordinary competence buried inside the chaos. The official banners went up along Marina Road and the airport expressway. Hotels filled. Plus, journalists arrived. First the British Press Corps, who descended in organized groups with lanyards and equipment cases, and then the international wave, crews from France and Germany and the United States and Japan, all of them with fixers and translators and pre-arranged interview slots. The restaurants near the government house in Abuja reportedly ran out of table bookings within 48 hours of the itinerary being published. In the, I think, markets, fabric sellers were doing brisk business in a blue and ivory combination that someone on social media had decided matched Catherine's most frequently worn palette. Whether this was true or not was irrelevant. It caught on. Tailors posted pictures of finished pieces. Mothers commissioned matching outfits for their daughters. A woman in Ikeja went mildly viral for showing up to her cousin's engagement ceremony in a dress she'd named, with complete sincerity, the Whales. It was too much and exactly. Right all at once. I went to visit a primary school in Surulere on the Wednesday before the visit began. I went because a source had mentioned that the school was one of several that had sent children's artwork to be displayed at the venue of one of Catherine's engagements, an initiative someone in the organizing committee had quietly added, that nobody had made a headline out of. That was just there if you looked. The school principal, a woman named Mrs. Adeyemi with close-cropped hair and ink-stained fingers, walked me to the room where the children had worked on their pieces. The paintings were still on the walls. The ones chosen for the display were gone, transported days ago, but the others remained, bright and crowded with color. The way children paint when nobody has told them yet to be restrained. We asked them to paint what they loved about Nigeria, Mrs. Adeyemi said, which I looked at the paintings. Markets, water, football, mothers cooking, to be fair, rain on rooftops. Actually, child had painted the Lagos Bridge from an angle that shouldn't have worked, but somehow did. Orange at the edges, green in the middle, and 2 tiny stick figures at the railing, looking out at something that filled the whole right side of the canvas in wild blue. Did you tell them why? I asked. About the visit? We told them, she said. Some of them know who William and Catherine are. Some of them didn't. One boy asked if they were from a film. She smiled. We explained. What did they think? She considered this. They were excited, she said. But not for the reason you might expect. They weren't excited because it was royalty. They were excited because someone far away was going to see what they made. She looked at the paintings. That's all it was. Someone far away, seeing it. I drove home through traffic that evening, and the city was loud and orange and fully itself. The generators humming behind compound walls, and the hawkers threading between cars with trays of water and gum and phone chargers, the radio in the cab ahead of me audible through 2 layers of closed windows. Somewhere in Abuja, I knew, the advanced security teams were walking routes. Somewhere, Catherine's team was finalizing briefing notes on the maternal health clinic. Somewhere, The women of the fishing cooperative in Makoko were probably having a meeting about what to say, how to say it, what they wanted someone to carry back to the world. And in a school in Surulere, children's paintings of the country they loved were drying on walls, and the best ones had already been rolled and wrapped and sent somewhere they'd never been. Someone far away. Well, seeing it. I sat at my kitchen table that night and didn't open my laptop for once. I just sat. Outside, not the neighbor's radio was playing something slow and old. I couldn't make out the song, just the shape of it, the brass and the bass, the kind of music that comes from a time before you were born and still somehow knows you. In 2 kind of days they'd land. And whatever that landing meant, whatever the cameras would say, whatever the analysts would argue, whatever would be remembered and whatever would be forgotten, the city had already done the thing it does when it decides something matters. It had dressed itself. Plus, painted its curbs, ironed its good cloth, hung, its banners, sent its children's paintings out into the world. And that, I thought, that particular gesture, that specific reaching forward, that was the truest thing, not the politics for what it's worth. Though of it, not the history behind it or the questions underneath it. Just this, a city that wanted to be seen. And 2 people coming, at last, to look. End of part 2. I got there too, hours early, and the crowds were already 3 deep. This is the thing nobody tells you about covering a moment like this. The waiting is its own story. Before the motorcade, before the security sweep, before the official anything, there are just people, hundreds of them, then thousands, pressed up against the barriers that had gone up overnight along the approach road, in the morning heat that Lagos delivers without apology, with their phones raised and their best clothes on and their children on their shoulders. The woman directly in front of me had braided her daughter's hair with ivory ribbon. I noticed it because the girl kept reaching up to touch it. Absent-mindedly, the way children worry at something new and uncomfortable, and the woman kept gently lowering her hand without looking down. She was watching the road. She had been, watching the road since before I arrived. I asked her eventually how long she'd been there. "Since 5, she said. It was nearly 8. "Are you from Lagos?" I asked. "Ibadan," she said. "We took the bus last night." There's a thing that happens in large crowds at the moment before the thing they've gathered for actually occurs. It's not louder. It's almost the opposite. A collective intake, a suspension. Like the crowd becomes briefly one organism, and that organism holds its breath. I felt it before I saw the first car. Honestly, a ripple. Starting somewhere further back, where someone with a better angle had caught sight of something. Moving honestly, forward through the crowd in a wave that had no sound at the front. Just people straightening, just phones going higher, just the woman from Ibadan gripping her daughter's shoulder without knowing she was doing it. Then the motorcade, black cars, police outriders, which the practiced, unhurried speed of official movement, covering ground while appearing not to rush. And then, the window. I want to be careful here because I know what it sounds like when a journalist tries to describe a moment of genuine human impact and makes it into something it wasn't. I know what manufactured feeling looks like on the page. I've written it by accident before and I recognize the smell of it. So I'll just say what I saw. The window came down. No, and Catherine leaned basically out, not a managed half lean, not the careful wave of someone performing public warmth, just leaned, the way you lean when something outside catches you by surprise and your body responds before your training does. And she looked at the crowd. Plus, and the crowd, all of it, 10,000 people or whatever the count was, all of it made a sound that I have been trying to find the right word for ever since. Not a scream, not a cheer. Something with more texture than either. Something that came from lower in the chest. Recognition, maybe. Plus, or arrival. The sound of a long wait ending. The girl with the ivory ribbon in her hair was crying. She didn't know she was crying, which she was still watching the car, still standing on her toes. And the tears were just coming. And her mother looked down and saw them and pulled her close without a word. I covered 4 engagements over the 3 days. Will tell you about 2 of them. The first was the Roundtable on Early Childhood Development, held in a conference room in Abuja that was clean and cool and arranged with the careful intention of someone who had thought hard about atmosphere. Not intimidating, not grandly formal, the chairs close together around a table that wasn't ostentatiously large. Catherine arrived without the full formal protocol of the other engagements. Less preamble. She came in, introduced herself to the room, actually introduced herself, first name, handshake, the small genuine ceremony of meeting people, and sat down. I wasn't in the room and I watched through the pool camera feed. But I was speaking afterward to one of the Nigerian developmental psychologists who had been at that table, a woman named Dr. Okonkwo, small and precise, the kind of person who measures words with a calibrated internal scale before she releases them. And I asked her what it had been like. She thought about this carefully. She listened. "Doctor, for what it's worth," Okonkwo said. "That sounds simple. It isn't simple." She looked at me steadily. "I have sat with many important people in many important rooms and told them what we know about the first 5 years of a child's life and why the funding structures in this country make what we know almost impossible to act on. And I have watched those people nod." She paused. In my opinion, she didn't nod. To be fair, she asked questions. Look, real questions. Plus, the kind that tell you someone has been thinking about this before they walked into the room. She picked up her water glass. "I don't give endorsements," she said, that isn't my job. But I will tell you that I left that room with a different feeling than I usually leave rooms. "What feeling?" I asked. She considered. "That the conversation would continue," she said. "Somewhere, that it didn't end when she walked out. The second engagement I'll tell you about was Makoko. I took a boat. The press group was small, pool only, 4 cameras, 2 print journalists. The water was its own color in the early afternoon light, that brown gold that the Lagos Lagoon goes when the sun is at a particular angle, and the community rose around us as we moved into it. The stilted homes, the canoes threading between them, yet the children appearing at railings and calling out to each other about the visitors, the sound of the place that is constant and layered and not like anything else. William and Catherine arrived by boat. I watched Catherine step from the boat onto the wooden dock of the fishing cooperative and the 2 women waiting to receive her. The co-op leaders, both of them in the same bright print, both of them with the particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who are in charge of things, stepped forward, and there was a moment that happened between them, one of those exchanges of human gravity that exist beyond language. They shook hands. Then one of the co-op leaders, her name was Mama Ngozi, and she had been running this cooperative for 22 years, through floods and government neglect and a global pandemic, said something to Catherine that I couldn't hear from my position. Catherine laughed. A real one. The kind that catches you off guard, which head back, actual noise, the kind that doesn't care about cameras. And Mama Ngozi laughed too, and whatever that joke was, whatever small impossible to translate human thing passed between them on that dock above the brown gold water. It wasn't in any briefing note. It wasn't in any protocol. It was just 2 women on a dock at noon, and one of them had said something funny, and the other one had actually found it funny. Later, I asked one of the co-op members what Mama Ngozi had said. She told me. I'll keep it to myself. But it was funny. It was very Mama Ngozi. She said, I think Catherine, wherever she's now, probably still remembers it. William's presence was its own kind of gravity. He is taller in person than photographs suggest, which sounds like a trivial thing to notice, but isn't. It has to do with how he moves through a space, how a room rearranges itself slightly around him. Not because of performance. Closer to physics, which he met with a group of young tech founders in Lagos, a cohort from one of the city's incubators, working on everything from agricultural logistics software to a maternal health app that operates without consistent data connection, which in the Nigerian context isn't a limitation they're working around, but a core design premise. I spoke afterward to one of them, a young man named Fola, 26 years old. They're 3 years into building a crop distribution platform that has changed the supply chain for smallholder farmers in 4 states. Fola isn't easily impressed. He told me this himself, in those exact words, before he said anything else. "I'm not easily impressed," he said. "Actually, that's not arrogance. It's context. I've met venture capitalists who flew in from San Francisco and gave me 40 minutes and a term sheet and thought they understood my problem. So I was ready to be polite and leave." He paused. "He asked me about the infrastructure constraints first," Fola said. "Basically, not the product. The infrastructure. The things that make building in this market different from building anywhere else. He wanted to understand the gap before he asked me how I was bridging it." He looked at me. "That's the right question," he said. "But that's the only question." And he asked it first. He was quiet for a moment. "I don't know what happens next," he said. "I know that these visits don't always turn into things. I know there's a long road between a good meeting and actual structural change." A pause. But he knew what question to ask. And that matters more than I thought it would. The last evening. State dinner in Lagos, and I was outside with the press pen, not inside. The inside was for dignitaries and officials and the managed ceremony of formal diplomacy. But you could feel it somehow, from the outside, the light coming from the building, plus the occasional fragment of music. I stood, actually, with Tola, who had gotten her credentials and had been shooting for 3 days on barely any sleep and was operating on pure professional adrenaline. "Well," I said. She lowered her camera, which scrolled back through some of the day's shots on the screen. Stopped on one. Handed me the camera. It was the Makoko doc. I think Catherine and Mama Ngozi, shot from an angle and a distance that caught the water behind them, the homes above them, the children watching from the upper railings. And in the center of it, 2 women, one of them mid-laugh, the real kind. It was extraordinary. The light on the water, the color, in my opinion, the laughter. "That's your front page," I said. "That's more than a front page," Tola said. She took the camera back, looked at it again, and that's the truth of it. They left the next morning. Lagos does not slow down for departures any more than it slows down for arrivals. By the afternoon, the roads had their traffic back. And the restaurant near my office had its usual queue. The banner nearest my building was already looking slightly worse for the heat. My neighbor Chisholm texted, "Do you think they'll repaint the road again now that they're gone?" I sent back the crying, laughing emoji. But here's what stays with me. Not the motorcade, not the state dinner, not, the diplomatic language in the joint communique released the morning after they left, full of commitments and partnership frameworks, and the careful future tense of institutional promises. What stays with me is the woman from Ibadan, who took a night bus with her daughter to stand in the heat from 5 in the morning, who held her daughter's hand down, gently, every time the girl reached up to worry the ivory ribbon in her hair, who had been watching that road since before I arrived, and who, when the window came down, when Catherine leaned out and the crowd made that sound I still don't have the right word, for, gripped her daughter's shoulder and pulled her close, wordlessly, the way you hold something you've been waiting a long time to show someone. Here. I mean this. Look. I don't know her name, and I didn't ask. I was too far back. And then the moment was gone, and then the crowd moved. But I think, look, about her daughter's face, the ivory ribbon. The tears she, to be fair, Didn't know she was crying. And I think about the paintings still hanging in the school in Surulere, the ones that didn't get chosen, or the children who painted what they loved and sent it out into the world, markets and water and football and rain on rooftops, and one child's impossible orange-green bridge with two stick figures looking out at that wild blue. Somebody saw it, which not everyone gets that. Not every reaching forward finds someone reaching back. This time it did. My mother called me 2 days after they left. "Did you see them?" she asked. "I saw them," I said. "And?" I thought about how to answer that, about everything I'd seen over those 3 days, the round table, the dock, Tola's photograph, which Fola's careful, uneasily impressed face as he told me about the right question. "They came basically properly," I said. My mother understood what I meant by that. She's a woman who knows the difference between showing up and being present. And then she understood that I was saying both things at once. "Good," she said. We were sort of quiet for a moment. "Your grandmother would have been satisfied," she said. Not happy, not thrilled, satisfied, the word she uses when something has been done the way it ought to be done. The word that, in her vocabulary, isn't a small thing. I looked out my window at the city. Still loud, still hot, still entirely itself basically, ungovernable and extraordinary, going about the business of its life without asking anyone's permission. The road outside the Arts Theater would need repainting eventually. The banners would come down. The journalists would find their next story. But Mama Ngozi's laugh would stay on Tola's hard drive. Fola's platform would basically keep running its supply chains across 4 states. And the women of the fishing cooperative would keep their morning meetings above the brown gold water. Dr. Okonkwo would keep going back to the same table in the same room, telling the same people what she knows about the first 5 years of a child's life, and believing, with a little more reason than before, that the conversation would continue somewhere. That isn't nothing. That is, in fact, almost everything. A city reached out its hand, and this time, for 3 days, in the heat, above the water, in a school, a clinic and a room of people who had spent years building things from nothing, someone reached back.